In my video, Perfectionism and Min-Maxing was ruining games for me, I talked about playing Clair Obscur completely blind, without guides. In the comments, a lot of people shared their experiences with gaming and playing with and without guides, and today I want to talk about something that came up in a few comments. Why even use guides in a single-player game? We've all collectively accepted that using guides is normal for online games. When playing with or against others, it's less about your personal experience and more about maximizing your performance. The gameplay isn't about freely discovering what the game has to offer, but more about finding the most optimal way to execute on the game's goals. I think my tendency to use guides even in single-player games largely comes from my experience with World of Warcraft. From people inspecting my character and telling me that the cloth robes my warrior was wearing were obviously wrong, to later guild members showing me which add-ons I needed to sim my character's gear to find upgrades. And of course, people telling you in competitive content and on forums, if you're not using this or that add-on, you're obviously trolling. Using guides or information outside of the game is a form of metagaming, and it's especially common in online games where playing the meta by picking the best class or most optimal loadout is a big step towards the group actually completing their goal. Yes, you could play an off-meta specialization in World of Warcraft, but your chances of getting invited into a group are smaller, because most people aren't willing to bet their game time on a random off-meta player being better at the game than somebody playing a meta spec, because the perception is that for the average player, the meta choice will perform better. This obviously ignores that it's better to have an exceptional off-meta player than a bad meta player in your team, but you have no way of judging that when you're inviting a random stranger into your group. So, the meta choice is the safe and the most optimal choice. But single-player games are different. You don't have to rely on optimal strategies to get to a goal quickly. You're allowed to roam free and enjoy the game. Why use a guide when there's no one there to tell you what to do or to explain why your playstyle isn't optimal? We've been using guides for single-player games for decades. At first they showed up as blurbs in game magazines, but both official and unofficial guidebooks for games have existed since the early 90s. The official strategy guide for Myst that came out in 1993 had already sold over 300,000 copies when the reprint released in 1995. Guidebooks were a great way for game publishers to market their game and to make more money at the same time. In her book Cheating, author Mia Consalvo says that strategy guides are unique texts because they are basically asking you not to use them unless it's an emergency. Getting completely stuck, hitting a wall with a game is the first reason I can think of for using a guide, walkthrough, or other meta information. And yes, this can even be true for puzzle games where the main enjoyment should be coming from solving the puzzle by yourself. A few years ago I was playing 12 Minutes, a time loop game, and I got completely stuck. And the annoying thing about this specific game is, well, one of the annoying things, is that you can get to the end of the loop, not learn anything new, and then your progress gets reset to the beginning of the 12-minute loop. And then you have to go through the same series of convoluted steps to get to the same point in the loop, only to make a mistake, or worse, discover that whatever you're trying to do doesn't even work. It's tedious, and because I'm a curious person who got invested into the story, I looked up how to fix the particular loop I was stuck in. And in hindsight, I'm glad I did that because the solution to this particular puzzle was so elaborate that I still would have been stuck to this day, and honestly the narrative payoff wouldn't have even been worth it. Guides can help you when you're completely stuck, but in general they also save a lot of time and frustration. In my video on Clair Obscur, I mentioned experimenting using the recode ability to reset my character's skills and attributes a lot. When a game lets you switch your settings quickly and easily, I'm less likely to want to use a guide because I feel like I can just experiment and try something else if it's not working. When games soft lock or hard lock you into your decisions, for instance by making it hard to switch or time gating, it can be very frustrating being locked into choices you made when you didn't fully understand the complexities and mechanics of the game. When Blizzard reworked professions in World of Warcraft to be more engaging, players could use talent points to specialize into different skills within the professions. However, these points were not only heavily time-gated, but you couldn't reset them. Once you picked a lane, even if it was whoopsie single-handed weapons while you used two-handed weapons, you had to stick with it, because eventually you'll get enough points to specialize into everything. This design choice causes people to be very careful when spending their points. While it's an example from a multiplayer game, wanting a smooth gameplay experience is also true for single-player games. Some people just don't have the time or the desire to go back to earlier sections of the game to grind experience points so they can choose the more optimal route once they've hit a wall. Using guides or other information online comes at a cost though. The experience of discovery. When I first played Hades years ago, I didn't look at build guides or achievement walkthroughs, I was just hacking and slashing my way through the underworld. But when I revisited the game later to get all the achievements, I did eventually have to look up some information, and I'm glad I did because it turns out I already wasted a lot of time and resources on misunderstanding one of the achievements. For the achievement complete set, I had to earn all the companions, but one just wasn't unlocking and I couldn't figure out why. Turns out, in order to get the companion, you have to buy upgrades for the in-game house, not the rugs though, and then the character comes to find you and give you their companion. This is something I never would have found out on my own, especially because I didn't really care for the decorating the house part of the game. Sometimes when you're done discovering the game on your own, but you want to 100% finish everything the game has to offer, you need a bit of help to guide you to things you literally never would have discovered by yourself. I guess this reason is very similar to the getting stuck reason, but just at a later stage of playing the game. There are some things that are difficult to find on your own because they have too many complex steps, are hidden well, or don't really match your style of gameplay. My style of gameplay has been heavily influenced by playing World of Warcraft for years, but also by a tendency to be a more goal and performance-oriented person in general. I'm bad at roaming around, and even in cozy games like Stardew Valley, I think, okay, so make a lot of money quickly, you said? I think the only reason why I was able to not use guides for Clair Obscur was because I didn't want to get the game's story spoiled. Games have gotten more and more complex since the game guides were in magazines and actual physical books. The first time I remember using guides was because my English wasn't good enough to even understand what was happening within the game. Guides have also been very important in helping gamers overcome accessibility issues and flatten difficulty curves. In general, however, using guides in single-player games comes down to wanting to avoid frustration and wasting time. Because games are supposed to be fun, and if you're stuck on a boss for hours when you only have limited time to play, a guide can help you. I love to hear your takes on using guides or not using guides in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.